There is a very particular moment that can happen inside an avoidant. A moment they rarely talk about, may struggle to admit even to themselves, and would probably never want you to see. It begins somewhere deep in the silence you created, not at first. In the beginning, their defenses can still convince them that your silence is temporary. They may assume you will eventually come back, reach out again, or return to the familiar pattern you both became trapped in. To them, the relationship may feel paused rather than finished. But something changes when the silence continues, when you do not reach out, when the familiar pursuit suddenly disappears, when they begin to realize that you have genuinely chosen your own peace instead of continuing to chase someone who repeatedly made you question where you stood. That realization can hit much harder than they expected. Inside them, several emotions begin colliding at once. Pride, shame, longing, anger, confusion, and the fear of needing someone they worked so hard to convince themselves they could live without. It is not a simple experience of missing someone. It is a psychological conflict between the identity they built and the reality they are now being forced to face. And at the center of that conflict is one deeply uncomfortable realization. You humbled them without ever trying to. You did not humiliate them. You did not attack them. You did not demand an explanation. You simply valued yourself enough to stop participating in something that was draining you. And that can be incredibly confronting for an avoidant. Let's begin with the emotion people often overlook: embarrassment. An avoidant can develop a very particular identity inside relationships. They may privately see themselves as the person who can take the relationship or leave it, the person who needs less, the person who can step closer when it feels safe and disappear when intimacy becomes uncomfortable. They withdraw when things become emotionally intense. They return when distance feels safer. They offer warmth and then pull it away. Over time, this creates an unspoken dynamic where their availability feels like something they control. As long as you kept reaching, that identity remained intact. Your actions appeared to confirm their belief that you were more invested, more emotionally affected, and more dependent on the connection than they were. They could withdraw and still feel secure, because somewhere in the back of their mind, they expected you to eventually close the distance. Then you stopped. And you did not stop through a dramatic confrontation. You did not threaten them. You did not create a scene that would allow them to blame you or defend themselves. You simply removed your energy. That changes everything. Suddenly, the person they assumed would continue pursuing them is no longer pursuing them. The person they believed was more emotionally invested has stepped back. And the person who built their identity around being independent and unaffected is now sitting with an absence that may feel surprisingly similar to need. That is where the embarrassment can appear. It is the uncomfortable realization that the story they believed about the relationship may not have been true. They may not have been as detached as they thought. They may have cared more than they allowed themselves to acknowledge. They may even discover that your presence had become part of their emotional security without them consciously recognizing it. And what makes this even harder is how quietly you handled it. You did not need to prove anything. You did not need to announce that you were done. You simply stopped accepting a dynamic that was no longer honoring you. There is something deeply confronting about being met with dignity by someone you repeatedly took for granted. They cannot easily argue with it. They cannot easily blame you for it. Your silence gives them very little to fight against. Then comes the anger. Yes, an avoidant can become angry when someone finally stops participating in the pattern. But that anger does not automatically mean you did something wrong. Often the anger comes from losing control over a dynamic they had become comfortable with. There were unspoken expectations operating beneath the relationship. You would remain available. You would eventually respond. You would keep caring even when they pulled away. You would tolerate the uncertainty while they maintained emotional distance. They may never have said these rules aloud, but their behavior depended on them. Your silence broke those expectations all at once. And suddenly, a system that had worked because you continued participating no longer worked. That is why your withdrawal can feel so disruptive to them. It forces them to confront something they were able to avoid while you kept reaching. They were never completely in control of the connection. Your silence did not punish them. It revealed the reality that had been hidden beneath the pattern. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is stop trying to convince someone of your value and allow your absence to show them what your constant presence had been quietly providing. I want to make one thing very clear here. The anger is irrational. On some level, the avoidant knows that, and that awareness is part of what makes the emotion so difficult for them to process. They cannot openly justify being angry at you without revealing the sense of entitlement underneath it. Because how do you explain being angry at someone simply because they decided to choose themselves? To explain it honestly, they would have to admit that they expected you to remain available. And that realization can clash painfully with the image they have of themselves as reasonable, emotionally intelligent, fair, and self-aware. So the anger has nowhere comfortable to go. They cannot truly place it on you because you have not committed some obvious offense. You simply stopped reaching. You made a personal decision to step away from a dynamic that was no longer healthy for you. At the same time, completely turning that anger inward would require a level of self-examination they may not yet be capable of handling. So the emotion remains trapped somewhere between the two. It becomes restless, uncomfortable, and quietly humiliating because it reveals something they would rather not see about themselves. But underneath the anger and embarrassment is another emotion, and this one is much more vulnerable. Grief. Real grief. The kind that comes from realizing what they had with you, what it meant, and what their own patterns may have cost them. Grief is especially difficult for an avoidant because grief requires acknowledging that something was valuable. You cannot genuinely mourn something you never cared about. Loss forces you to admit that there was something worth losing. And that directly challenges the story of complete self-sufficiency that many avoidant defenses are built around. Your silence can bring that realization closer to the surface. Not because silence is some psychological trick designed to make them suffer, and I want to be very clear about that. Your silence simply removes the distractions that previously allowed them to avoid confronting what they felt. When you were still reaching out, there was always something for them to manage. They could decide how quickly to respond, how much closeness to allow, how much distance to create, and how emotionally available they wanted to appear. They could monitor your reactions and keep adjusting the relationship around their comfort level. But when you stop participating, all of that disappears. There is nothing left to control, nothing to adjust, nothing to monitor. There is simply your absence. And when the constant movement stops, the feelings they were avoiding can become much harder to escape. So what happens next? The first reaction is often surprisingly predictable. They create even more distance. This may seem completely backwards. You become silent, and instead of coming closer, they may withdraw further. From the outside, it can look like they have moved on effortlessly. It may appear as though your absence means nothing to them, and they are perfectly comfortable continuing with their life. But appearances can be incredibly misleading. Sometimes creating more distance is not evidence of indifference. It is the way someone manages emotions that have become too overwhelming for them to process directly. When feelings become too intense, the avoidant may return to the strategy that has always given them temporary relief. Disconnect. More independence, more distractions, more emotional walls, more convincing themselves that they do not need anyone. They may look completely composed, while internally working extremely hard to maintain that composure. The stronger the internal emotion becomes, the more aggressively they may try to create the appearance that nothing has changed. Then, after some time, another phase can begin. Reflection. It does not necessarily happen immediately. Everyone processes loss differently, and the depth of the connection matters. But eventually, even strong defenses can struggle to hold back the reality of a genuine absence. And that reflection often appears during the quietest moments, early in the morning, late at night, while driving, during ordinary tasks when their mind is no longer completely occupied. Suddenly, memories of you can surface. They may remember particular conversations, small moments, the way you understood something about them, or the rare periods when their defenses came down and the connection felt completely natural. They may remember how you made them feel when they allowed themselves to be seen. They may remember things you did that they never properly appreciated at the time. And eventually, they may begin connecting those memories to their own behavior. What did their distance create? What did their silence cost? What did they destroy by repeatedly moving closer and then pulling away? Those questions can become much heavier when there is no longer another person standing there to absorb the consequences. That is where the real humbling happens. Not through some dramatic apology, not through a performance designed to get your attention, not through pretending to suddenly understand everything. It happens privately, when they begin carrying the full weight of choices they once believed would have no serious consequences. But now I want to bring the focus back to you, because I do not want you to become so focused on what may be happening inside the avoidant that you forget why you became silent in the first place. Your silence was not supposed to be a weapon. It was not supposed to be a psychological trick designed to make someone chase you. Maybe some people use silence strategically, but that is not what makes your silence powerful. Your silence matters because it represents a decision. You stopped abandoning yourself to maintain a connection that required you to keep proving your worth. You stopped carrying the emotional responsibility for two people. You stopped trying to convince someone to give you the consistency, honesty, and presence you should never have had to beg for. And that is the part that matters most. Whatever the avoidant feels afterward is ultimately their responsibility. Your responsibility is not to monitor their reaction. It is to recognize what your silence has revealed about you. You are capable of walking away from what keeps hurting you. You are capable of choosing peace over uncertainty. And sometimes the most profound change is not making someone finally understand your value. It is finally understanding your own. But the kind of silence I am talking about, the silence that can genuinely humble an avoidant, the silence that brings embarrassment, anger, grief, and eventually reflection, is not created as a strategy. It comes from exhaustion. It comes from reaching that deep, almost physical level of tiredness, where you realize you have been pouring everything into a connection that keeps taking more from you. It comes from the moment when continuing becomes more painful than letting go. The moment when the cost of holding on to hope finally becomes greater than the possibility of what that hope might someday give you. That is not a tactic. That is a turning point. It is the moment you stop building your life around someone's inconsistency and start building it around your own value. And your silence communicates something that arguments, ultimatums, explanations, and confrontations could never express with the same power. It says, "I finally understand my worth." Not as a motivational phrase you repeat in the mirror, not as an affirmation you say because you are trying to convince yourself, but as something you have actually accepted within yourself. Something real, something lived, something you are no longer willing to negotiate away just to make another person comfortable. You are no longer willing to sacrifice your peace so someone else can remain emotionally unavailable. That is why your silence can affect an avoidant so deeply. Yes, there may be anger, there may be embarrassment, there may be grief, there may be an uncomfortable period where they begin questioning what happened and why you are no longer responding the way you once did. But beneath all of those emotions, there can also be something unexpected: respect. Because self-possession is one of the qualities an avoidant may value more than they openly admit. Their entire identity may have been built around independence, emotional control, and not allowing another person to have too much power over them. And then you demonstrated something they may not have expected. You became just as capable of walking away, maybe even more capable than they were. Think about the contrast. Their withdrawal may have been filled with mixed signals, inconsistent communication, sudden distance, emotional walls, closeness followed by retreat, and repeated cycles of coming toward you and then disappearing again. Your withdrawal was different. There was no performance, no dramatic announcement, no attempt to punish them, no endless explanation. You simply stopped. You stopped chasing. You stopped asking for what should have been freely given. You stopped turning your pain into another reason to keep fighting for their attention. And that kind of self-possession can leave a lasting impression. They may never tell you that. They may not even fully admit it to themselves. Their external behavior may remain distant. They may continue acting as though nothing happened. They may even convince themselves that they are unaffected. But that does not mean the experience left them unchanged. Because you did something they were not expecting. You refused to abandon yourself just to preserve the connection. You did not fight them. You did not chase them. You did not try to make them feel guilty. You simply recognized that your worth was not something you needed another person to validate. And sometimes that realization speaks louder than any conversation ever could. Your silence was not about winning. It was not about making them regret losing you. It was not about proving that you could survive without them. It was about finally becoming unwilling to lose yourself for someone else. And when you reached that point, your silence stopped being a message directed toward them. It became a promise to yourself. A promise that you would no longer negotiate against your own dignity. A promise that you would no longer confuse inconsistency with love. A promise that you would no longer keep knocking on a door that someone repeatedly chose to keep closed. You did not need the perfect final speech. You did not need one last confrontation. You did not need them to understand everything you had been feeling. You simply chose yourself. And sometimes that choice says more than words ever could.